Emphasized in your remarks that President Putin requested the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if in the long period of time between the two leaders meeting, whether President Putin had requested other meetings that the White House or the President had turned down.
I probably won't chronicle the meetings that didn't occur, but I would note that in the June call that the President placed to discuss Ukraine with President Putin, we noted in the readout that that was also a telephone call that President Putin had requested. So it is clear that he's interested in the attention of the leader of the United States of America, and given the lengthy list of concerns that we have about Russia's conduct in a couple of these international hotspots, a face-to-face sit-down seems appropriate at this juncture.
On Putin, you said Putin requested the meeting. Did he say why?
Well,
obviously a lot of things to talk to Vladimir Putin about. Did he say why he wanted to speak with the president?
Well, I'd refer you to the Kremlin for their explanation about why President Putin would like to meet with President Obama. I think I've tried to make clear to you why President Obama believes that a conversation with President Putin could be useful.
Okay, well, the Kremlin's been quite forthright in saying that, first of all, that Putin wanted a meeting, being the first to be out there to say the meeting would happen, and then now the only one to tell us exactly when that meeting is supposedly taking place. Was the president kind of reluctant to take this meeting? It seems like the Kremlin's been certainly more forthcoming in talking about it.
I think some might conclude that that means the Russians are
more transparent?
Well, or yeah, I know, it's okay. Or more desperate, right? That they're
more eager to have this meeting.
Well, they certainly. I think it is fair for you to say that based on the repeated requests we've seen from the Russians, that they are quite interested in having a conversation with President Obama, and after I think what I would acknowledge is some careful consideration on our end, the president did make a decision that it was worth it at this point to engage with President Putin in a face-to-face meeting to see if the interests of the United States could be advanced in the context of those conversations.
I wanted to start with the Putin meeting in New York next week. Can you give us a little context for what we should be expecting out of this meeting? Does the president see it as a meeting that could result in some agreements between he and Putin on Syria and Ukraine, or does he see it as an opportunity to just kind of take Putin's temperature on both of these issues?
Well, Julie, President Obama does look forward to meeting with President Putin at his request, at President Putin's request, next week. Both presidents will be attending the UN. The precise date of their meeting is still something we're hoping to resolve before the end of the day today. Okay. So I'll let you know whether or not we can confirm that on our end. But this, when the president sits down with President Putin, the top item on his agenda will be Ukraine. And President Obama will once again use this occasion to reinforce to President Putin the importance of Russia keeping the commitments that they've made in the context of the Minsk agreements. This is a message that President Putin has heard from some of our European allies who've raised concerns with the way that combined Russian separatist forces in eastern Ukraine continue to destabilize that country. And they continue to receive important military support from the Russian government. That is a clear violation of the territorial integrity of that sovereign nation. And you know, the impact of the coordinated action of the United States and our allies on Russia as a result of those activities are not insignificant. They have contributed to a significant weakening of the Russian economy just over the last couple of years since those sanctions were put in place. The IMF projects that Russia's economy will contract 3 to 4% this year and will stay in a recession next year. The Russian economy in 2013 was measured at 1/8 the size of the United States, the 9th largest economy in the world. In 2015, the Russian economy is just 1/16 of the size of the U.S. economy and is now just the 15th largest economy in the world, one rung below Spain on the latter. The Russian central bank, since the start of the crisis in eastern Ukraine, has lost around $150 billion in reserves, and both S&P and Moody's have downgraded Russia's credit rating to junk status. So it is clear that Russia's international isolation and their continued refusal to abide by basic international norms, particularly when it comes to these combined Russian separatist forces, has taken a significant toll on their economy. And this will be at the top of the president's agenda when the two presidents sit down in New York next week.
And yeah, and I guess finally on this, do you worry, or was it considered at all, that by having this meeting, which seems like it's going to be in a much more formal way than some of the sideline conversations they've had over the last year or two, that this weakens your argument that you are isolating Putin on the world stage?
No, I think, well, you do raise an important point about sort of the length of time it's last been since the two leaders sat down in a formal way. There have been a couple of conversations around, the president last spoke to President Putin in July to discuss the completion of the P5+1 agreement with Iran. And in the context of that call, the president rightfully acknowledged the constructive way that Russia had participated in those multilateral talks. They had spoken a month earlier than that, back in June, to discuss the situation in Ukraine, in which the president raised some of the concerns that I've just outlined. And they had face-to-face interactions last fall, I believe both at the G20 and at APEC. But this is the first opportunity that the two leaders will have had to sit down in a formal way to discuss some of these issues. And look, President Putin requested the meeting, and I think at this point, considering the significant concerns that I've just raised, I think it makes sense for President Obama to sit down with his counterpart and see if he can get some greater clarity about Russia's intentions inside of Ukraine and whether or not they are going to begin to take steps to abide by the commitments that they have made but failed to live up to in the context of Ukraine, and whether or not they're willing to at least consider President Obama's advice when it comes to reinforcing their military support for the Assad regime.
So you're not concerned that by giving him the meeting that he's requesting and giving him sort of the photo op portion of it, I assume, that you're weakening this isolation aspect of what's supposed to be punishment for Ukraine?
Not at all, and there will be. The fact is, I mean, I chronicled the toll that Russia's international isolation has taken on the domestic economy over there. And that's not going to change because of one in-person conversation. But a meeting like this does have the potential for giving the United States greater insight into exactly what Russia's intentions are. That insight is not likely to be gleaned based on one conversation, but it could lay the groundwork. It could potentially lay the groundwork for better coordination. I think that remains to be seen, but at least it's a proposition worth testing.